very honored to having you here, Frank. And Mr. Frank Priess is head of the Department for European and International Cooperation at the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. And he graduated with a degree in political science, philosophy, and communication from Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. And then 2 years after graduated, Mr. Priess joined the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation as the representative to Colombia and Peru, a position in which he was also responsible for Latin American media program for the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. Later on, he moved as representative to Argentina. And Mr. Priess has also have many other senior positions as Konrad-Adenauer through this career, among them the head of the International Human Resources Department, head of the Press and Public Relations Department, head to the Asia Department, head of the Political Communication Department, and representative to Mexico. But beyond all this impressive, very impressive career and all this professional challenge, what is remarkable from Frank, I need to say that is his capability to analyze very complex issues, and that makes you one of the best analysts of current political affairs, and is what impressed me the most from you, beyond your long list of success in everywhere. So this is too much to say for these turbulent times. So we are willing to hear you and to learn from you, Frank. The floor is yours. We are having 45 minutes in total, and it can be 20 or 30 minutes for your presentation, and then 15 to 20 minutes to questions and answers. Okay?
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Recording this presentation, okay?
Okay. So thanks a lot for the invitation, for the opportunity to be with you, to share some viewpoints from a German perspective in, as you said, turbulent times. We feel this very much in Germany as well. For a lot of people, 24th of February, the Russian attack on Ukraine came as a shock moment. It wasn't really a surprise for many people, on the other hand, because Russian aggression started long before. Mr. Putin was well known before his activities in Chechnya in the early 2000s, the attacks in Georgia, in the Caucasus, then 2014 Crimea, crossing the red lines together with Mr. Assad in Syria, the activities of the Wagner Group in Africa. So for many people, this was somewhat like an attack with former advertisement, as to say, and still, a lot of people didn't expect that, because they always thought Mr. Putin is the person who is calculating very well, probably, and many analysts share this position. In this case, it was a little bit a miscalculation. It was a miscalculation about the Ukraine capability to defend itself. Probably the years from 2014 to 2022 were very well used by Ukraine and the friends from United States, from Britain, and from others in training, in equipment, in all that. And the other mistake probably was to think that the West would react like always, raising the finger and say, oh, this was not very kind, but the sanctions would be quite limited as in former times. And this as well was a mistake. And so Mr. Putin is confronted with the situation we see now, with Europe closer to the United States than it had been for a long time. Neutral countries like Sweden and Finland joining NATO, isolation somewhat in the United Nations when only countries like Syria, Belarus, and Eritrea and North Korea are on your side. So this moment in February was for many people something catalytic, in the sense that it's more of the same we saw in the last 20 years, but at the same time a new situation. And I would say this is true for Germany as well. Chancellor Olaf Scholz reacted with a speech in the German parliament on the 27th of February, 3 days after the Russian attack, announcing a 100 billion euro package for enforcement of the German armed forces, announcing that we will deliver weapons to Ukraine, which is a break with a long-time German position not to deliver arms to conflict areas, and a lot of other aspects called in Germany Zeitenwende, which means somewhat like a change of time, changing time, times of change. There are a lot of interpretations, and this word Zeitenwende in Germany is very much remembered now, nearly 8 months after the speech. For us, we learned in Germany, and this, I think, is a difference to our neighbors in the East, especially when it comes to the Baltic countries, when it comes to countries like Poland. For us, this attack finished a little bit the well-being with our German business model. Our business model was that we get security for free by the United States, not investing very much ourselves. We promised 2 points of the GDP, 2 percentage points of GDP for defense in the Wales summit of NATO long ago. We never fulfilled this promise. We stay by 1.2, 1.3%. So always relying on the United States. Second pillar of our philosophy and our model was we get cheap energy from Russia. We can do our energy transition based on cheap Russian gas, which gave a lot of advantages to German industry as well, because price of Russian gas coming by pipeline is very, very cheap compared with other energy forms. And the third pillar always was globalization, is when others are buying our cars, especially in China, relying heavily on exports in China, heavily investing in China, underestimating a little bit the character of the Chinese regime and the fragility of supply chains with China. So all these three pillars now are at least under threat, and in some cases, like the Russian gas, it's broken. So for us, this means to invest more in our own security, looking for alternatives in energy, and looking for new and other partners beside China when it comes to export and investment. This is a really big threat for an industrialized nation like Germany, which in comparison, even in Europe, relies a lot on industry and not so much on services and on other areas. Other countries saw this coming earlier. When it comes now to our neighbors in the East, Poland, the Baltics, they warned us a lot. We started this famous pipeline Nord Stream 2 in 2015, even after the Russian annexation and Crimea. And now partners in the East are telling us, okay, now you are learning it the hard way, because you didn't like to listen to us. And the second lesson is for us as the Eastern European partners, and this is a problem for European Union, is when it's troubling times, when we need real help, we rely on NATO and the United States, and we do not rely on the axis France, Germany, because this axis doesn't listen to us. This axis does not deliver. And this has huge consequences for the stability of and the inner structure of the European Union. Because when we look to the changing world, we see after the Trump years, United States with a philosophy buying American, the times where Trump saw the German car makers as a national threat for the United States isn't long gone. And maybe next week, when we have the midterms in the United States, even a possibility of a comeback from Trump or other people. What would this mean for Europe? And on the other hand, China, which is defined in the European strategy on China as a partner, a competitor, and a strategic rival. So when you see this polls, the answer would be what we need is a strong and united Europe. But reality in Europe is far from that. Europe isn't very strong. We are losing ground, and we are not very much united, especially in times when each and every member of the 27 has a veto power. And sometimes the example, even in democracy, which we are showing the world, isn't so bright for a lot of countries. We are speaking in these times, looking to Russia, looking to China, from the perspective of systemic challenge, systemic rivalry, the West, the traditional West, on the one hand, the authoritarian countries on the other hand. But we see that a lot of important countries in the world are not joining this point of view. When it comes to United Nations, a lot of countries do not vote openly with Russia, but on the other hand, they do not openly oppose Russia. You see the BRIC countries, you see Brazil, you see India, you see South Africa, you see Indonesia, you see a lot of African countries which are very much reluctant to take sides, and they remind us that our credibility is at least limited in some cases, comparing the Iraq war, the lack of interest in the wars they are engaged in, Yemen and Syria, and now they say, and now you expect us to take sides in your war in Ukraine. This is not our case, this is not our business, but at the same time we see that they are under stress as well when it comes to energy, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to a lot of countries. But we see this competitive situation for the West, for us, for example, in Africa, where 44% of the weapons delivered to Africa come from Russia, others come from China, and the rest comes more or less from Turkey. Classical powers like France are losing ground. So the circumstances for us in Germany and in Europe aren't very bright. Geopolitics is back. The challenge of systemic rivalry is back, and at the same time we are losing ground. Our model isn't shining so bright as we always are thinking. Others are quite successful as well. And the backsliding in democracy we see even in countries in Europe like Poland, like Hungary, like others. So a lot of people abroad tell us, what are you telling if you are not even doing your homework? So this is always easier to analyze than to offer perspectives, what could be done, what should be done, what should be our reaction. In economic terms, I would say the message is quite clear. It's absolutely necessary not to rely only on very small number of sources for energy, for raw materials. We need to be broader based on that. This is in Germany quite difficult because we have a lot of taboos in German internal discussion, the actual coalition when it comes to the Greens. We are leaving nuclear energy, as you know, but at the same time, we are buying electricity from nuclear energy elsewhere in France and in other places. We are not as quick as we liked in the renewables. We are against fracking, but we are buying liquid gas in the United States, which comes exactly from fracking. And at the same time, when it comes to raw materials, which we also need for the renewables, when you look to the windmills and to all that, in Germany, in Europe, having a mining project in U1, it's nearly impossible. Always there are veto groups. So China does not have this problem. The Congo does not have this problem as well. So getting rid of this kind of taboos is a long way in Germany. But there is no other perspective than try to develop more sources, more resilient supply chain. It's necessary to be closer together with friends and allies. I think this kind of coalition of the willing is coming back, not only the traditional West, but as well countries like New Zealand, like Australia, like Korea, Japan, and others. There is necessity for a common strategy, for example, in technology development, in sharing of technology, and in better forms of acting together, even in multinational arenas like the United Nations and others. And the most important task still, I would say, we need to strengthen the European Union. We need a discussion about majority decisions, getting rid of these veto positions. We need a common defense and security policy. We need better cooperation in technology and in armament projects to be on the top of technological advancement. And this, everybody knows, it is easier to say than to realize. But I think there is no better idea, because in this changing world, to rely on the classical nation state, even for countries like Germany, I think this is not a realistic option. As well, we need to look for partners in other places of the world. Europe, for example, would be well advised to invest in more free trade agreements. It's a shame that the Mercosur-EU agreement, which was negotiated for more than 20 years, isn't still in place, and that we not even were capable to ratify free trade arrangements with Canada. If you cannot be on the same terms with a country like Canada, with whom you can cooperate, really. So there are a lot of areas where a lot of political forces need to rethink their positioning. And this means that at home, democracy needs to be more resilient in times of polarization. We need democracies which are not only input oriented with more participation, more possibility to take part, but as well on the output side, the democracies should deliver, that our model in the world is interesting, and we need a realistic view of the surroundings and of other countries. And with this, I would finish for the moment to have time for discussion, for debates, for comments. We have in Germany, and I recommend that it's available in English as well. The Körber Foundation in Germany once a year is doing a survey about how Germans are thinking of foreign policy and the role of Germany. And in this case, they shared it with data from Pew Research Center in the United States, how the Americans are looking at the world. And this is quite interesting. For example, even in this challenging times, 41% of the Germans say we should get engaged stronger in international affairs. But 52% say no, we think we should be a little bit reluctant in engagement. When it comes to engagement, 63% of the people interested in engagement say it should be diplomatically. Only 13% are willing to invest as well in hard currency, in military activity, military cooperation. So this shows a little bit that we still like to be a little bit in enlarged Switzerland, and that we are not fit for the role many countries, even in the European Union, are expecting from Germany. 39% of the Germans in this survey are of the opinion that our standing with our partners got damaged because we were very shy on helping Ukraine. So 39% of the people say this was not enough. The partners see it, and this damaged German reputation. And this shows something as well. 60% of the Germans, meanwhile, have a negative view on China. Only 10% think positive about China. This is a change very strongly in the last years. And 22% think that Russia is the biggest security threat for Germany. 7% think it's China. So it's very mixed feelings, it's very mixed results. It shows that there is still a lot of homework to do, that there is more sensibility in the public about what Germany should do, what Germany could do, what are we able and willing to do alone and with our European and transatlantic partners. So I think we have to work on a lot of fronts at the same time, and it starts with a realistic view at the world. So I would finish for the moment here, that we have time for your comments, for your insights, for takes where you agree or disagree. So thanks a lot for the moment, for the attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. Thank you very much. Well, I need to ask you, you haven't mentioned anything about Latin America, and that's a very clear sign of irrelevancy. But I need to ask your view on the future of the region. But let's wait for more questions and or comments from our class. Okay. Okay. We have many hands.
Okay.
Okay. Starting with Marta. Déjame para enfocar a Marta.
Okay, well, first, thank you, because it was really interesting. And my question is related to Well, you said that the European Union is not really united. And my question is that if you could explain like the reasons why like we are not really united, and how, well, you said that we had just like European countries, we have to work on many issues to be more united, but that's my question, like why we are not really united and why there is so much instability.
All the questions and then answer.
Oh, do you prefer all the questions first?
Uh, as
And
you like, we can do it one by one. Maybe
okay,
it's easier.
okay, yeah, that works too.
Okay, just a take on Latin America. I mentioned the free trade agreement with Mercosur. I think this would be a very important tool for Europe and the European Union to get closer to Latin America. I see 2 points. On the one hand, Europe relaxed too much on always saying Latin America is our value partner. We share the same values. We are with this continent closer together than with any other, forgetting that this needs hard currency as well. This needs interest, this needs investment, this needs cooperation. And sometimes these nice words from both sides weren't followed by concrete action. I think Mercosur is quite a good example. If you are negotiating 20 years this kind of agreement, and then it fails because even in the European Parliament, it's once again about environmental standards, and you are overloading trade agreements with a lot of stuff. And even in Germany, the meat industry thinking that Argentina could not fulfill the high standards for meat in the European Union. For people who know meat from Latin America and here in Europe, it's laughable, but always there are lobbies in the concrete moment that you do not come to task. On the other hand, second, Latin America as well does not make it easy for Europe as well. Latin America is boxing a lot below its weight. If you see big countries like Brazil and Mexico, in Mexico, the president for so long time was very proud not even having a passport. He did only one journey to Central America since he is president, and to Cuba, but does not visit the world, does not participate in summits. Brazil under Bolsonaro was completely paralyzed, looking inside only, without a role, as you would expect for a country with 200 million people, part of G20, be part of a lot of international affairs. So it's both-sided. Europe is not doing enough, Latin America is not doing enough, and competitors, meanwhile, are very strong in Latin America. And the majority of Latin America, China, meanwhile, is the most important partner for economic cooperation. And this has consequences. When I look to Argentina, that they allow China in the Patagonia, a radar station run by Chinese, and not even allowing Argentinian officials entering this flat, looking what the Chinese are doing. I see the invitation programs of the Chinese, scholarship programs, investment in Latin American media. There is no sensibility for that. And on the other hand, in Europe, there is very little engagement to counter it, because the eyes are not on Latin America. And the United States for decades did not even have a Latin American policy. And when it comes to treatment of the neighboring regions, I think it's a pity to be so abstained from concrete action. When it comes to the question of European Union, I think there are different aspects. One, I mentioned in the security area, that there is a divide between Western, Southwestern members of the European Union and Central and Eastern members of the European Union. In the East, people always felt a little bit too much dominated and lectured by the West, especially by France and Germany, with this kind of action to say, okay, you came late to the European Party, so let the adults decide, and this is good for you as well. There are a lot of different issues in societies in the East compared with society development in the West when it comes to the role of nation states, when it comes to how much sovereignty are you willing to share with others inside the European Union. Migration crisis of 2015 was a big blow for relations inside the European Union. When it comes to common projects, always national interests are in the way. For example, together, European countries have a very important defense budget, but if even the smallest nations are developing their own airplanes or their own tanks, not sharing with others, it's very difficult to come to concrete action. On the financial sector in Germany, everybody is looking south and say, okay, this Club Med countries always interested in not reforming and looking for financial help from Germany. And in these countries, they say, oh, the Germans benefit a lot from the common market. But when it comes to engage more in helping us, they are quite nationalistic as well. We see it today with our package. The government made a 200 billion package on gas, energy and inflation to help German industry and German consumers. So in the south and in other areas, people are saying, okay, Germany is financially very well off, so you can outspend us. You can buy gas to a price where we never could. You have a lack of solidarity. And I see that some countries are very much inward looking with their veto when it comes to a country like Hungary, with a special relationship with Russia, for example, vetoing tougher actions by the European Union. We see countries like Malta and Cyprus selling their passports to the oligarchs in Russia and Africa and elsewhere. So a city like Limassol in Cyprus has more or less 100,000 Russian population. So these people entering Europe, free flow. So there is no will of political action together. We see energy and environmental standards, but the European Union still is divided. The parliament in Brussels and in Strasbourg, which is really madness, but nobody could tell France, let this go with Strasbourg. It will be Brussels, and bring 2 or 3 other institutions to Strasbourg for compensation. So always people would say, compared where it started, we came a long way in Europe. It's still the most impressive integration process in the world. But compared with the necessities and the task we feel today, the reality in Europe isn't at the point where it should be.
Thank you, Mr. Priess, because it was a very interesting discussion. And I wanted to ask you, okay. I wanted to ask you, because I remember that when the war in Ukraine first hit, I read an article about how Spain, since it mainly obtains gas from African countries like Algeria, would now have a very important role as a gas provider in the European Union for other countries that do get their gas from Russia, for instance. So now that winter is approaching, I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the main consequences we can see here in Spain now that somehow Spain will have to share and provide gas for the other European countries? And what does it mean for the other European countries that now will have to obtain their gas from Spain?
I think this is a really important position, but it's linked to what we discussed until a moment about European Union. For example, the government of France. The government of France is very reluctant to this kind of pipeline projects between Spain and France, which is necessary for the connection of northern European countries. So there are discussions about alternatives to make a pipeline through the Mediterranean from Spain to Italy. So there are still difficulties to have this kind of integrated European energy network, which is very much important. I think Spain has a very important role for its position in the Mediterranean, especially when it comes to countries like Algeria, Morocco, and others, with the conflicts between these two countries as well. This is another aspect that Algeria is not happy with the Spain position on the Western Sahara. So they only deliver their gas to Italy and not to Spain. So we need a common joint positioning of the European Union in front of our African neighbors on the other side of the Mediterranean, with Spain in a very important position. When it comes to hydrogen power, for example, countries like Spain with very good conditions on hydrogen production with solar energy, this could be a very important role in the European Union as well. And the most important, Spain invested a lot very early in ports for liquid gas tankers. Meanwhile, Germany does not have only one terminal for liquid gas. So others in former times were more diversified than we had been. But for me, the answer is we need a very strong and interconnected network of European energy supply, not only north-south, but as well to the east, for example, to make countries like Moldova and others more independent from Russian gas supplies as well. When it comes to the Western Balkans, we need to offer alternatives to the energy supply from Russia, which is available even in price for this country. We cannot blame them to being too close to Russia when we do not offer alternatives for their very, very important needs of energy, for example.
Well, thank you very much for presenting. I actually come from a German school, and so I'm pretty much aware of what's going on in the AMPA right now. I remember reading yesterday that Chancellor Scholz was going to China. I think that was either today or yesterday, to talk about, well, to influence China into influence Russia to like stop the war. Now that you've been mentioning that Germany, it's becoming more dependent on China, isn't this more dangerous now to, at this point, even if more Germans think that it's a bigger risk, or that they feel that China is a bigger risk than Russia? Because I also read an article that said that many Germans, like 19% of Germans, are actually believing what Putin is claiming, that they didn't have an option to start the war. So I feel like from the German side, even though it's not as the polarization is not as in the USA, it's becoming more evident. And well, I just said a lot, but basically the question is if this visit managed to help or either make the problem in the polarized
German like side bigger.
Mhm. Yeah. I think it's impossible to ignore that in this moment we are very much dependent on China. This is a fact, especially for big German industry groups with the car makers in front of all of them, with Volkswagen, with Mercedes-Benz, where there is heavy Chinese investment in Mercedes. And in case of Volkswagen, half of the profits of Volkswagen actually is coming from the China business. And the CEOs of this enterprises are arguing that for the moment, we need this profits from China to realize our transition to electromobility and other places. When it comes to raw materials, the rare earths and other delivery from China as well is very much important, and it cannot be substituted between today and tomorrow. This does not mean that this kind of dependence should last forever, especially in the moment when China itself is trying to decouple a little bit from the West. China under Xi Jinping has this policy of double circulation, becoming more independent on imports from the West, especially in technology, and on the other hand, have a big say in via the exports of China in the West. This is a Chinese strategy, and it's important for us to look for more diversified supply chains, to look to other countries as well. Vietnam is a partner in this, other countries as well. But I think it would not be wise to see China only as a strategic rival. I think this description by the European Union to say China is a partner, China is a competitor, and China is a strategic rival, this is quite useful, because in a few weeks we will have the COP27 on climate change. I don't see how you can fulfill climate change goals without cooperating with countries like China. We need a partnership with China on a lot of issues. It's obvious that China is a competitor, and this is illegitimate as long as China is playing to the rules. We need to strengthen WTO and others, because for us, this kind of free trade, of this kind of competitiveness is quite sane. It's a problem if only one side is on the receiving side. So we need this diversity, and we need to have it clear that China is a strategic rival, and there are areas where we should stand our ground to say, okay, this is a totalitarian system. This is the system which inside China does not respect elementary human rights. When it comes to Xinjiang, to the Uyghurs, when it comes to situation of Taiwan, which is very much now in the mirror, looking to the comparison what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Many people think it could be China politics on Taiwan as well. Our problem is that for the United States, China is the strategic rival and the antagonic country in the future. The United States isn't happy to be so much engaged in Europe for the Ukraine war. They see their engagement in Asia Pacific, and Indo-Pacific as a lot more important. And they see Europe and the usefulness of Europe more through the mirror. How can Europe help American position in front of China? This is not 100% of our interest to decide only to be with the US or be with the Chinese. So therefore, I once again would say we need to strengthen our own pole. We need to strengthen Europe, but it's very much seeable in the Ukraine war that Europe is not able to defend itself against aggressive countries like Russia without the nuclear umbrella of the United States and the help from the United States. So this makes us vulnerable when it comes to our standing with the United States, even in front of China. And United States is trying to decouple from China. United States is banning Chinese firms from delivery of more or less sophisticated chips and other areas, and Europe is in this position more or less to follow on. But it's not our interest, and therefore from a party viewpoint in Germany, I would argue a little bit different, but I don't see that it's a mistake that Mr. Scholz, our chancellor, is visiting China in this moment, and taking as well a delegation of business leaders with him. I think this is very much in our interest, in the national interest, and I hope that he will mention as well all the issues which are important here, from human rights to Chinese-Russian cooperation as well. But I think it's necessary to have a realistic point of view, and a foreign office is not Greenpeace and Amnesty International. So there are national interests, the interests of Europe as well, and these interests are well served as well, having channels with China as well as with other countries in the world.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. I think that we have two more questions from Sergio and Davide. Any more? No? Okay. Sergio.
Well, first of all, thank you for giving us this discussion. And my question is that, having in account the aggressiveness of Russia during these past months, what do you believe could be the realistic outcome if the countries Finland and Sweden actually end up joining the NATO after being threatened by the Russian government?
I think this is, yeah.
We have the both last question finishing. See?
First of all, good morning and thank you. And yeah, also my question is about the Russian war, and like, to sum up, if you expect like more a deadlock phase, like a Cold War style with long-term like threatening and just a lot of words, if you expect like a short escalation by Putin with like maybe the nuclear threat becoming real, or it's just like threatening and words over words like a Cold War?
Okay, I think this is a very difficult question. I do not see a solution in short time. Nobody really has a close insight today how the inner system in Russia is working, how stable is the Putin government, how strong could reluctance in the population become in front of this war. what I'm seeing is that still there is a lot of stability for Putin. There are still huge numbers of people in Russia supporting the war on the basis of all this bombardment of propaganda and this nationalistic kind of discourse, narratives, even by the Russian Orthodox Church and others. Putin surrounded himself in the last years even always more by people from the intelligence sector, by military. Other power centers in Russia had been diminished in a very strong way. So in the short run, at least I do not see that Russia inside is changing. And on the other hand, I do not see that for Ukraine, it's an option to negotiate somewhat on the situation we have in this moment still with a lot of parts of their country under Russian control, with this kind of Russian aggression, with war crimes, with all that. And I see no alternative for us in the West to help Ukraine as good as we can, delivering weapons, strengthening the sanctions, targeting responsibles inside Russia, and trying to isolate Russia more worldwide. Russia is not as isolated as we would like it to be when it comes to Africa, when it comes to other areas. China is still close at the Russian side, avoiding a conflict with the West over the sanctions, breaking sanctions. This is not the case, but for Xi Jinping and Putin, America and the West, with their model of society, of democracy, of color revolutions, all this is the enemy. So they stick together. This won't change. This needs intelligent activities for us with partners who are sticking with Russia and making them clear and counter the narratives in other parts of the world that it was somewhat of a Russian defense against NATO. It's necessary to remind the world and even in Latin America and Africa that Russia is an imperialistic country, as well as always was seen about Britain, France, and others. The expansion of Russia in many places in the East, in the South, it is classical imperialism, and the situation that Russia helped liberation movements in Africa does not mean that Russia is not a state like this on its own. Will this mean somewhat like a Cold War? Cold War was a worldwide confrontation, even about ideology. I do not see that the Russian example, that there is an ideology, for example, which is very much attractive to people. Russia brought itself in the situation being the junior partner of China, depending of China, and China really is the weight in the world to observe. Some people said, if you want to discuss it in terms of meteorology, Russia is a tsunami, but China is the climate change. China is so much important because as well it's attractive for many countries which authoritarian role, seeing a country which is delivering. So there we need good answers on the economic side, but as well on the side of resilience for Western democracy. I think this is a case in both areas which will last. And we need to show that the West and we are not as decadent as some people in Beijing and in Moscow are thinking. And now the resistance of the Ukraine is defending Europe as well, because if Russia fails in this war, and it's failing in this war, it's not reaching its strategic goals, this will diminish the appetite of Russia to do aggression in other areas as well, when it comes to Moldova, when it comes to the Baltics, and it will choke other people in the world that the West is able and willing to defend itself, and that countries like Sweden and Finland, very well respected countries, are now joining NATO. This is a very clear case, and this shows that Mr. Putin miscalculated, and that the camp of democracies, of liberal democracies, under threat from inside, but is still standing and delivering alternatives. And I think I do not see other ways to this, even if this could last for years.
Very much, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you. Aquí. It's hard to show you the entire class, but thank you very much.
Yeah.
We are very grateful. Muchas gracias, de verdad. Muy, como siempre, una visión muy amplia y muy profunda de los acontecimientos, cosa que es cada vez más escasa, ¿no?
No, muchas gracias por la opportunity, for the comments. It's obvious, as well as so many different countries represented here. The viewpoints differ from country to country. The interests sometimes differ, and it's always very useful to look for common ground and exchange this kind of positioning, and to look where reality is standing today. So thanks a lot for the invitation. Bye, and have a nice day in Spain.
Thank you, guys. Next week.